Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the first regular meeting of the Cowichan Valley Regional District Board. My name is Ian Morrison. I'd like to first acknowledge that this meeting is taking place in the traditional unceded territory of the Coast Salish people. I'd like to welcome alternate directors Toporowski and Bomford to the meeting tonight. Welcome. And if I could ask directors to turn to the agenda for today, I've just been made aware we have a closed session appointments that will be added as CSNB1. Are there any other items that we will need to consider as new business? Could we have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Staples. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor and those opposed, that motion carries. Mr. Berry.
Adoption of the minutes, regular board meeting of October 24th.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Nicholson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor and those opposed, motion carries. Item 2.
Adoption of the inaugural board meeting minutes of November 7th.
Moved by Director Marsh, seconded by Director McGonigal. Any discussion? Call the question. All those in favor and those opposed, that motion carries. Any business arising from those minutes?
No business arising.
Now we come to public input period of our meeting. Would anyone like to provide the board with input on matters on the agenda today?
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm Cliff Evans from Shawnigan Lake, and I would like to congratulate all the board here for being acclaimed or elected. And I know you're just going to have a real great 4 years here. And you can start off by doing some great things tonight and going to bylaw number 3 is the soil deposit bylaw and approving the third reading. We would really like that. Mr. Chair, 5 days a week, we have hundreds of trucks coming up the Malahat with pup trailers on, and they're loaded with soil. And they're dumping that in our watersheds. And they're wrecking our watersheds. And this is happening because the CVRD does not have a soil deposit bylaw right now. You would wonder why the people, the truckers and the companies from Victoria would bother loading their trucks and coming up the Malahat, which is quite a grunt, and using all that diesel to dump soil up here. Well, the reason why is that in Victoria, they have soil removal and deposit bylaws. And they have strict regulations for where people can pick up soil and where it can be dumped. So the truckers and the trucker associations have to buy permits and go by regulations. They have paperwork with every load to prove what they have on that load. When the trucks come up the Malahat, the CVRD does not have a soil deposit bylaw. And so these truckers can bring this up and dump just about anywhere without paying fees, or even paying fees but not having to go through all the paperwork. We don't know what's on some of those loads, but we do know that some of the loads are contaminated soil. Tonight, this bylaw, CVRD soil bylaw, is up for third reading. We've been fooling around with this thing for decades. And I just know that this board here can finally put this to rest, that we can finally get our own bylaw in. We can finally issue our own bylaw or permits, and Mr. Conway will have a grand enforcement officer to make sure that this happens.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Your 3 minutes is up.
May I just end by saying, please approve this third reading. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your input. Is there anyone else that would like to provide some input to the board today? I see no one rushing up to the lectern, so on to the next item. We have a delegation representing the Cowichan Watershed Coalition with an overview, and I'd like to invite up Bruce Fraser and Elizabeth Aiken, please. Welcome, you've got 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So first of all, the coalition members, 10 of us groups, want to pass on our congratulations to the new and returning members of the board. We recognize what a 4-year stint is, a significant portion of a lifespan, and we congratulate you for stepping up to do that kind of civic job. The Watershed Coalition gathered around the development of the regional water referendum. As a group, we believe that it should pass to provide local government with a status and a capability to enter into the water conservation issues of the region. And it involved the Shawnigan Basin Society, the Cowichan Lake and River Stewardship Society, One Cowichan Stewardship Roundtable, the Cowichan Valley Naturalists, the Cowichan Watershed Board, the Seminas Marsh Wildlife Society, the Yellow Point Ecological Society, Green Blue operating out of Ladysmith, and the Quamachan Watershed Stewardship Society. That's only 10 of the possible groups that might eventually be interested in the work of the coalition, but it represents a lot of people in a lot of places and a lot of existing commitment. Elizabeth Aiken beside me represents the Seminas Marsh Stewardship Society, and will be speaking about it as a case history in a couple of minutes. We supported the referendum through an op-ed in the Citizen, through a number of supporting articles from individual groups subsequent to that. Some door-to-door campaigning was conducted by One Cowichan, and there were public office hours held in Shawnigan. A number of attempts at various levels to engage the public to come up with a positive vote on the referendum, which they eventually did. We hope we contributed to that. Behind the scenes on all of this, we'd like to acknowledge that the Cowichan Watershed Board is the regional gold standard, if you like, of multi-level collaboration within a single watershed, and the wonderful engagement directly with First Nations partners. That sort of set the stage for the kind of collaboration which the coalition believes will be productive. So there were lots of cases where the Watershed Board was the instigator of other activity around the region. In the case of Shawnigan, the Shawnigan Basin Society actually took advice from the Cowichan Board members when it started up. And as the Coxsila group is now taking hold in the Coxsila watershed, it's the Watershed Board and the Basin Society, both of whom are contributing to its new development. So these kinds of intergroup collaborations have been going on for some time. So there's a great opportunity now for mutual support with the leadership from the CVRD matched with the local experience and expertise of local groups who have collectively hundreds of volunteers backing them up. The coalition members have been involved in quite a number of water stewardship issues, from watershed planning to foreshore restoration to the rescue of fish trapped in the river when it was dry, water quality research in a number of watersheds, bioremediation efforts, watershed field trips to familiarize the public with the basins, and establish relationships with forest companies. This represents a body of expertise and engagement which lies in wait, if you like, for partnership with the CVRD. Now, we are, as a group, looking for an active partnership right from the beginning, along with First Nations, so that the contributions that we can provide can foster widespread agreement with the direction to be taken by the board and the practical outcomes defined, both regionally and specifically to each community watershed. Regionally, because the groups have been collaborating already, and the deep engagement in individual watersheds serves as a reservoir of expertise, interest, information, ranging from the scientific to the cultural. So one of the things that we're asking of the board is that not only to be engaged early, but we look forward to a meeting of coalition members with the CVRD water team when it's established to explore how best to work together. It's an open-ended thing. We believe we have lots to contribute from the 10 existing members and others who might join. And we think this is a valuable resource that provides us all with a kind of opportunity to have influence well beyond our numbers, and for the pioneering work of the Cowichan Watershed Board to be ramified throughout the region. So the Seminas group has been highly active for some time, and we're asking Elizabeth to give you an idea of a case history of just how engaged they are.
Thank you. So yeah, I just wanted to provide an example of the resources our coalition can offer. So the Somenos Marsh Wildlife Society has already been had in place a scientist-led, volunteer-driven water quality monitoring program, which has been in place for 5 years now. So we collect thousands of data points annually, which are analyzed and reported on in-house by a senior ecosystem scientist. Also through collaborations with other groups in the coalition, we're working together to collect water quality data all the way from Lake Cowichan to the Cowichan Bay Estuary, and there are also focus areas in Somenos and Quamachin lakes. So we feel we have an idea of achievable watershed management goals and what resources are required to attain those goals. We actively work with all levels of government currently, and our groups literally do have hundreds of volunteers collectively who provide thousands of hours of their time on watershed restoration and stewardship initiatives in the valley each year. We already have strong collaborations between our groups, as Bruce mentioned. We work closely together, we share resources, which makes a lot of the work we do quite cost effective, and we feel a lot of the work we do is also scalable to other parts of the valley. The coalition consists of local groups made up of local people, so we really do know our neighborhoods and the water issues within them. We also feel we can provide continuity because we live here and we care about our community and its ecosystems. Some of our groups, including the Somenos Marsh Wildlife Society and the Cowichan Valley Naturalists, have been working on watershed stewardship locally for more than 3 decades. It's part of the value we provide. So that's all I have. Thank you. But we can take questions if anyone has any.
Turn to the board. Does anyone have any questions? Director Nicholson.
I don't have any questions, but I would say thank you very much for your offer. I think it's really important, and you, the stewardship community has been leaders in the valley regarding water issues, and we are new to this area. Really, we're the newcomers, and we could benefit greatly from your support and collaboration. So I hope that we can work with you moving forward.
Any other questions or comments? Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for your presentation. This is more a question for my information. As I understand it, there is already a function 131, which is in the region of $500,000 per year, which is for watershed studies. Is this going to be phased
Might
out?
not be an appropriate question for right now, but you can certainly check with staff. We're asking for questions or comments within the delegation's purview at this point.
Okay.
Okay,
All
fair
right,
enough.
thank you.
Director Smith.
Thank you very much for your time and your presentation this evening. One of the questions is, how will you search out other groups that are also working in these areas from the very north of the CVRD to the south?
We already have 3 groups from the north. The Yellow Point Ecological Society, the Green-Blue group from Ladysmith, that are directly members of the coalition. but it's an open-ended membership. I mean, there are others, for instance, like the group working out of Mill Bay on the transfer of fish into the Shawnigan watershed, for instance. I'm sure there are others. The Samina Society has been working with the Cowichan Land Trust, for instance, and is a member of that group. There are other groups interested in ecological restoration and so forth that have been working, the park societies, and probably the strength of the regional district is there are so many of these groups that already exist that can be drawn into the collective effort. And the 10 members of the coalition just took the initiative to get it started, but it's by no means ended there. Yeah.
Director Stone?
Thanks. I just wanted to say thanks for bringing that all together, because I know that there's been a lot of conversation, even in my short tenure in local government, around trying to get the impetus to bring all these groups together. And it was nice to see that when you looked at the list that there are you know, Shawnigan Basin Society's obviously established a reputation, Cowichan Watershed Board, but I know in the north, we've often struggled to bring that collaboration together. We tried as a council to bring the Watershed Roundtable to fruition in Ladysmith, and found that the conversation maybe would be better looked at regionally. And, you know, I think that was part of the impetus for the discussion around our previous board table to move that initiative forward. So I share Director Nicholson's sentiments in that I think that it's a great coming together of the desires of the stewardships groups and of the regional district. And I just want to say thanks for bringing that all together, and hopefully we can keep that dialogue open and be really constructive in our collaboration, and, you know, understand that there's big differences you know, hydrologically, geologically, in Yellow Point, for example, dealing with groundwater challenges, and, you know, some of the areas where we have forestry concerns and contaminated soil concerns. So there's a lot of different issues in different watersheds, all compounded by climate change on top of it all. So I think that it's exciting to see this delegation on our agenda today, and it couldn't be more timely, obviously, but I just want to thank you guys for finding the spirit of collaboration amongst yourselves. And it's positive to hear that you've kind of got that open-ended piece. So I just want to say thank you for that. And hopefully as we move forward with moving the initiatives in the agenda forward from the board, that we find that those goals align, and I think they will. But I just want to say thanks.
Right.
Director Marsh?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you both. I won't repeat what others have said, except to ask you to pass on to all your members deep gratitude for the thousands and thousands of hours that they volunteer in order to try and steward our environment and our watersheds. Cowichan is amazing for that in so many areas, and
Right.
thank you.
Director Seaburn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I was struck by one paragraph in the attachment to the agenda here. As notably pioneered by the Watershed Board, the coalition of groups would like to see representatives of each of the regionally present First Nations also be included directly in the development work of the regional function and adaptation to their traditional areas of interest. I think that's a critical piece. We can't overlook that. Thank you very much for including it. I think it's very much part of the kind of discussions we need going forward. Thank you.
Seeing no other hands, I want to thank you on behalf of the board for attending tonight, and want to send you off with keep up the good work, and we'll look forward to the next time you come before us again. So.
Yeah, and we look forward to joining you in it. Just a final comment, and it really relates back to our recognition of the Cowichan Watershed Board as a kind of instigator of the collaboration efforts. It was Tom Rutherford and Jill Thompson of that group that helped spark the coalition and bring them together in the first place. And Kelly Musselwhite out of Shawnigan Basin Society was joined to do some of the writing and convening. So there's been a lot of partners, but they all flow down from that original initiative of the board and the Cowichan tribes in putting the Cowichan Watershed Board together. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Next item is report of the chairperson. This will be brief. I just want to remind everyone that the bulk of the announcements in regards to the standing committees will, it's anticipated to occur on Wednesday, November 28th. Yet in the meantime, I would like to put forward the recommendation for the Electoral Area Services, which I understand has a reason to meet next week. And that will consist of Directors Acton, Nicholson, Kuhn, Smith, Wilson, Yenny, DiNardo, Salmon, Marcotte, and myself. And the chair will be Director Yenny DiNardo, and the vice chair will be Director Nicholson. And second appointment, which is one of three, but there will be a meeting next week that I'm wanting to attend, is for the Treaty Advisory Commission, and I'm putting myself forward as one of three. There's two other treaty tables that will require representation as well. So that is my report. Do we need a resolution from that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, because it's an external agency, we need a resolution of the board appointing Director Morrison to the Treaty Advisory.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Sebring. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor and those opposed, that motion carries. Next item, Mr. Barry.
There are no correspondence items and no information items. The next would be the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of October 31st.
Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your Electoral Area Services Committee reports and recommends as follows: that a grant need Electoral Area B, Shawnigan Lake, in the amount of $350 be provided to BC Youth Parliament to aid in tuition fees for the 91st BC Youth Parliament in Victoria. Number 2, that the purchase of an emergency power generator for the Malahat Volunteer Fire Department for a maximum cost of $21,000 plus applicable taxes, with any amounts over the original budget to be funded by 2018 operating surplus, be approved. Number 3, that CBRD Bylaw number 3707, Burnham Water System Services Establishment Bylaw 2013, be amended to increase the maximum annual requisition limit from $47,200 to $59,000. Number 2, CVRD Bylaw number 3034, Lamburn Estate Water System Service Establishment Bylaw 2008, be amended to increase the maximum annual requisition limit from $41,200 to $51,500. Number 3, the CVRD Bylaw number 3711, Mill Springs Sewer System Service Establishment Bylaw 2013, be amended to increase the maximum annual requisition limit from $109,600 to $137,000. And number 4, the CVRD Bylaw number 3052, Lamburn Estate Sewer System Service Establishment Bylaw 2008, be amended to increase the maximum annual requisition limit from $31,200 to $39,000. I'd like to have those moved.
Moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director Stone. Any discussion on those items? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor and those opposed, the motion carries. Next items, electoral areas, directors only.
Thank you, Mr.
Director Acton.
Chair. Number 4.1, that development permit application number DP18B16 for 1581 Strathcona Heights Road be approved, permitting subdivision of 2 parcels into 3 parcels, and 2, the General Manager of Land Use Services be authorized to permit minor revisions to the permit in accordance with the intent of development permit guidelines of the official community plan, bylaw number 3510. And number 5, that development variance permit application number DVP 18E01 on 2136 Deidre Drive be approved by variant section 7.3B4 of zoning bylaw number 1840 from 15 meters to 18.9 meters. Number 6, that amendment bylaws for application number 02D17RS at 4831 Trans-Canada Highway to permit event planning and the C2 uses exclusive of auction, building supply sales, and wholesaling be prepared. I'd like to move those items.
Seconded by Director Nicholson. Any discussion on those items? And this is electoral area directors only?
Just a clarification, Mr. Chair. Number 5, Director Acton read varying from 15 meters to 18.9 meters. It's 8.9 meters.
Thank you for that clarification. Is everyone clear? Again, electoral area directors only. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? And those opposed? Those carry. Thank you, Director Acton. No director reports today. Number 11, staff reports. Mr. Barry.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have two staff reports this evening. The first one from the Chief Election Officer, the Regional Voting Officer, regarding the results of the 2018 general local elections and regional assent voting. That was the referenda, and that is for your information.
Any discussion on those items? Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I really appreciated this report. It pointed out to me that we had a lot of referendum, a lot of engagement on the referendum questions, particularly from the municipalities compared to the electoral areas. And in general, I was disappointed in the voter turnout for the electoral areas. And I really feel strongly that we would be smart if we looked at our, did a bit of a review of our election process and looked at whether there are maybe different ways that we could perhaps try and increase community engagement in our elections before next time. And I think doing it sooner rather than later while things are fresh in people's minds would be a good thing to do.
Thank you very much, and I think that might be just an appropriate thing for staff to hear and note for our strategic planning sessions that will be coming up. Director Staples.
And just to add to that, for First Nations voting for director areas as well, I think that needs to be part of the discussion because there was a lot of confusion and that the polls, the stations were too far away for people, and so to put that on as a topic to discuss with that alongside with what Director Nicholson brought forward.
Thank you very much. Director Nicholson.
I actually think we have an opportunity because there was so much community help with getting out the message about the referendum questions that there's probably people in the community that would have some pretty good ideas on things, simple things that we could perhaps do, as well, of course, as the people who are out there campaigning.
Thank you very much for that. Seeing no other hands, we'll go to SR2, Mr. Barry.
And SR2, a staff report from the General Manager of Land Use Services regarding an Advisory Planning Commission appointment process. And there's a recommendation that the procedures for Advisory Planning Commission APC volunteer member calls and appointment process be updated to reflect best practice inclusive of a publicized volunteer APC membership call.
Director Marsh? Sure. Moved by Director Marsh, seconded by Director McGonigal. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor and those opposed, that motion carries. Mr. Barry.
We have no public hearing reports, but we do have a few bylaws this evening. And the first bylaw, Bylaw 4201, Cowichan Housing Association Annual Financial Contribution Service Establishment Bylaw, for adoption.
Hang on a second. Director Staples.
I just have to recuse myself from this vote.
And the reason?
I have a contract through work with Cowichan Housing Association.
Okay, thank you.
Until mid-December.
Do we have a mover? Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Acton. Any discussion on this item? Director McGonigal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I will piggyback on the previous comments about my disappointment in the turnout, not only for election purposes, but for the two very important referendum questions. When you look at the numbers and you look at the electoral area average voter turnout of 24.3%, it's pretty dismal that those two important functions that we are about to vote on as a new board did not have the support of more electorate. And to piggyback on that, the municipalities were a little bit better, but not much. at 38.32% average voter turnout, we are making decisions on about 15% of the total electorate on these two very important functions. So it's unfortunate and disheartening with those numbers. And although I don't agree that property taxation is the avenue to contribute to these important ones, I will adhere to the wishes of the electorate, and I will be supporting it.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands, I'm going to go, Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The comments about the low voter turnout are very, very valid and very disappointing too. I will not, my constituents voted against this particular bylaw adoption, and I will be voting against it as well. However, I'm sure that it will pass, but there's a couple of things that I would like to ask before the vote, and again, I need guidance here. Can I ask, first of all, if the bylaw passes, and I'm sure that it will, when a service agreement will be available for us to look at?
Mr. Carruthers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a definitive answer. We would be, if this bylaw passes tonight, we would be sitting down and making arrangements to meet with the Cowichan Housing Association and start those discussions, but I would suggest that we would have something in the first quarter of the new year. Obviously, an agreement also would be pending a budget approval by the board. So passing the bylaw is the first step. You also have to pass a corresponding budget for the service. So we would be looking at the first quarter.
And your second question.
On the basis of that service agreement, will there be input allowed from the directors as far as inspecting that service agreement? There is one particular point that I would like included if possible.
Mr. Carruthers, what's your anticipated process?
Staff will be coming to the board. The board has to approve that service agreement, so the board will have ultimate input to that agreement when it's drafted. So we'll be bringing it forward in draft form for the board's approval.
Director Nicholson.
Maybe staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but when I look at the numbers, there was 74% turnout of voters on the referendum questions, which I think is pretty good for the referendum questions.
Those aren't the numbers that I'm aware of, but we're beyond that report now on this one. Don't know if it's germane to the question that's before us. So are we ready for the vote? Director Marsh.
I just wanted to acknowledge all of the people who worked so hard to get us to this, I hope, historic time, and including our staff who sent out the facts of the ask. I think the people have spoken, and so.
Thank you very much. I will now call the question. All those in favor? And those opposed? That motion carries. Do you want to record the opposed, Director or Mr. Barry?
Mr. Chair, we are required to record the names of the opposed, and for those watching on streaming and who can't see in the gallery, we should name each of the directors who were opposed. If they could place their hands up again.
All those opposed?
So that would be Director Bomford, Director Wilson, Director Smith, Director Kuhn.
Over here.
And Director Morrison? Yep. The bylaw carries.
And could we have Director Staples brought back in, please? Mr. Barry, next item.
The next bylaw, CVRD bylaw 4202, Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Service Establishment Bylaw for adoption.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Marsh. Any discussion on this item? Director Kuhn.
I'm just wondering, the details of the funds disbursement, will they be set at the next meeting, or, as I pointed out in my critique earlier, throughout this process, I found both of the bylaws very ambiguous, especially this one. And I'd like to see some kind of indication as to where are the funds actually going to go. And to me, this whole thing is just open-ended, and I would like to have some kind of indication. And I guess I would feel more secure if this happened before the bylaw actually was approved than afterwards, because once a bylaw is approved, I mean, yeah, we can discuss all kinds of things then, but it's done. And so I have some concerns about that.
So my understanding is that the adoption of the bylaw commits us to nothing at this point, because to put it into effect is going to require the budget approval. And so, given that, would you like to jump in, Mr. Carruthers?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So it would be staff's intention to have a report in front of the board likely in January with a work plan for the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Service. We would anticipate doing that in a fairly fulsome manner. It's obviously a service with high public interest, as you saw with your delegation today. That work plan then would influence the board's decisions with respect to approving the budget. So that kind of detail would be sorted out in January and then into the budget process.
Thank you. Any other discussion on this item? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And those opposed? That motion carries. Those opposed, do you have them? Could you put your hand up for those opposed, please?
So Director Bomford, Director Smith, Director Kuhn, and Director Morrison.
And that motion carries.
Motion carries.
Excellent. Next item.
Third bylaw, Bylaw 4236, Soil Deposit Bylaw for third reading.
Turn to Director Acton. Would you like to move that?
Yes, please. And
Moved by Director
I have a
Acton,
question.
seconded by Director McGonigal. Any discussion on this item? Director Seaver.
I've sort of looked at this, and I'm a relative rookie at this table. Is there a commensurate soil removal bylaw within the CBRD? Because we ran into that in North Cowichan in the context of what happened on the slopes of Mount Suhalem, and we have a bylaw this thick on what you can and can't do in terms of soil removal. This is about soil deposit. Have we regulated the other side of this?
Mr. Carruthers.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The regional district has the option for both. We chose to focus on the soil deposit, given the nature of the issues that we were experiencing, particularly in the South Cowichan. I think the board made a strategic decision to focus on the soil deposit aspect of it, not to say that in the future the board can consider looking at adding the removal. The deposit is the critical issue facing us, and so we chose to focus.
I get that. I just wondered whether there was a removal, any rules around that right now.
Not right now, and there may be in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Earlier this week, I sent out photos of aerial shots of some of the dump sites that are happening over time in Shawnee Lake, mostly Area B and Area A. So I hope that people had a chance to look at that and understand how important this issue is for the South Cowichan area in particular. But I guess my question is for staff, if this happens today, what kind of timeline can we expect, and what will be the next steps going forward?
Let me get Mr. Blackwell to a microphone.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Director Acton, the fact that this is before you at third reading was the result of a last-minute request by the ministry. We were led to believe that only 2 readings of the bylaw were necessary, and then that would be sufficient for the ministry to review it, have the minister endorse it, and then it would be back before the board for consideration of third and final. That changed recently. They said it was third reading that's required. So once third reading is granted, should it be granted, it goes to the province for that same review. The minister will review it and forward it back to the board for final reading. Given that the ministry has had it for quite some time, the expectation is that they've done the work on reviewing the details. The key consideration that they will be reflecting on is whether or not there's anything in the bylaw that unduly restricts the ability of the province to regulate the things that they have the authority to regulate. Working with our lawyer, we can tell you with certainty that, in our view, there are no such provisions in that bylaw, so it should be pretty straightforward, and I would expect to see it back before the board in short order. That's about as clear a timeline as I can give you.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. I looked back at my emails, or thanks to Director Salmon. I think we came to second reading a year ago and was told that that was the case, that it would come back and then it would be, or just 2 was enough, and then it would get final reading. But my question is then, what if the province is not so quick as we keep hoping, which is kind of feeling a bit traumatic here? Is there something that we could do perhaps on the ground? I happen to have coffee with Mayor Helps, and she's willing to help in some way, or is there a way that we can go to different councils and have them accountable for some of the soil that's coming up to our area, so that we can, I guess my question is just, is there something we could do that's a little more proactive on the ground so that we can start kind of deflecting it a bit more in case it takes a while?
Mr. Blackwell?
Thank you. Through you to Director Acton. Anything is possible. It's a question of return on investment. How much time do you want to spend on chasing down these other possibilities? So, to your point, could there be a dialogue with various jurisdictions at the south end that have soil removal permits? Yes. Can those soil removal permits and the regulations or the bylaw stipulate that the applicant has to indicate where they will remove the soil from and where they will place it? Yes, that is a provision that they can include. I have no idea whether or not they're going to want to be that onerous. I don't know whether they're going to be inclined, even if they were to be that onerous, to follow up to ensure that, in fact, those contractors are relocating the soils to the sites that they are indicating on the application form. So can we do it? In theory, there's lots of things we can do. It's hard to know what the degree of success we would achieve doing that. I think, given the demands on resources at the CVRD, the most prudent thing to do is to let this thing run its course with the ministry. As you noted, the ministry have had an iteration of this soil report for a long, long time, so there can't be much work left to do with respect to its review. So I would anticipate it's a quick turnaround, and that's probably the best use of staff time.
So, Mr. Blackwell, I'm going to rephrase a little bit. If we haven't heard news back from the province on this specific item by our first board meeting in January, would it be appropriate that we have further discussions about the nature of actions that Director Acton is speaking of? Is that a reasonable time frame for them to have this and to peruse it and to at least give us an indication of when we might hear back?
Thank you. You can certainly set aside any time that you desire to. We can do what we can to check in with MOE to make sure that it's getting attention. I feel confident that it is. I would also like to point out, though, that deadline should not necessarily be the determining factor as to whether or not you want to have those conversations. Those kinds of conversations might be fruitful to have anyway at your AVICC events or other events. I think that, as watersheds kind of cover multiple jurisdictions in the CVRD, things like soil and air and other things cover other jurisdictions as well. So interjurisdictional collaboration, I think, can always be a good starting point.
Any further discussion on this item? We have movers and seconders. Call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion carries. Next item, Mr. Berry.
The fourth bylaw, Bylaw 4241, Solid Waste Management Facilities Reserve Fund Expenditure. This is for a replacement loader, $75,000 at Bings Creek. First three readings.
Moved by Director Sebring, seconded by Director Marsh. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor and those opposed, the motion carries.
And Bylaw 4241 for adoption.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Kuhn. Any discussion? Call the question. All those in favor, those opposed, that motion carries. Mr. Berry.
The only thing remaining on the open portion would be the question period.
Would anyone in the gallery like to pose a question to me in regards to items on today's agenda? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming tonight. We would need a motion to resolve into closed session. Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Marcotte. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion carries. Take 5 minutes. Yeah.